The word conspiracy derives from the Latin con, with, together, and spirare, to breathe. The world is abound with mystery. Occasionally, we get to glimpse beneath the curtain. So let's take a breath together and do some research. Hi, my name's Alex Witney, and this is Conspiracy 101. Today, we're looking into MKUltra. So, MKUltra. A very, very strange... Oh no, I'm not in incognito mode. This is terrible. Yes, I need to go into incognito. You just don't do anything unless you're in incognito mode. So, MKUltra, a very strange one in regards to conspiracies, because for most people, this is one of the conspiracies that when people talk about it, they will immediately go, new tab, is that it? Yeah, that's it. Excellent. There we go. They'll immediately go to this, and a few others, in which it can be seen as a conspiracy that has been vindicated, a conspiracy theory that's been vindicated into a full-fledged conspiracy. There aren't many that are out there, completely out there. There are quite a few, and we're going to discuss and go over many of them. But MKUltra is definitely one that comes up a lot. And it's one of those things where I want to talk about it, obviously. So where do we start? Wikipedia, obviously. But because it's quite dark in places, and it often leads into other topics that are very dark, and that's probably where the conspiracy theory still lingers with MKUltra. It wasn't just the fact that it was done. There was conspiracy to try and get rid of evidence, which we'll discuss. But it was done, but then there are other things that go above and beyond and around it. So what I'll do is I will copy over, just for some nice background. There we go. Whilst we have a look at our favourite book, Cover-Ups, the 100 Most Disturbing Conspiracies of All Time. Who's it copyrighted to? Collection and editorial material copyright J. Lewis Stemple and Emma Daffin. I promise I won't read all of it. But MKUltra, let's see what they say about MKUltra. Again, I'm not going to read it all. Because most of the information that we're going to be gleaning is from the internet, aka internet research. If I wanted to do this with books, I'd go to a library. MKUltra, long before the Beatles experiment, blah 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 blah. Yeah, this book's a bit, there's only 2 pages on MKUltra, and it's already got like a paragraph just being dumb. So, it was set up in the CIA. It had Alan Dulles in 1953. The CIA Mind Control and Alteration Project was codenamed MKUltra, taking its name from the CIA spy work behind Nazi lines in the Second World War. However, there's little notable about the MK namesake. So MK stands for mind control, but in German. Led by Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, MKUltra involved some 150 research programs, many of them using unsuspecting or entrapped human subjects. Notorious Operation Midnight Climax recruited San Francisco prostitutes who laced their unsuspecting clients' drinks with acid so the CIA operatives could film the ensuing shenanigans from behind a two-way mirror. It goes on to a lot of different things, but what I really want... So later, Gottlieb was revealed to have used files generated by Nazi medical research at Dachau, which is just appalling. Electroshock and LSD comes up quite a lot. And mind control was what they were really going for. So, mind control was an unholy grail of MKUltra, which at one stage consumed 6% of the CIA's entire budget. Now, remember, MKUltra wasn't just one specific thing. I think it's remembered now for the LSD experiments, the mind control experiments, but it wasn't just one program, it was a lot of programs put under this branch. The impetus behind the program and its forebear, Project Artichoke, was the alleged success of the communist countries in brainwashing US prisoners during the Korean War. Returned home, the soldiers exhibit strange behaviour and were unable to recall their movements through Manchuria. The phenomenon gave novelist Richard Condon the inspiration for his twice-filmed novel The Manchurian Candidate, in which an American GI is, through hypnosis, programmed by Chinese and Korean communists to assassinate a US presidential candidate. Whether the CIA ever successfully succeeded in programming its own Manchurian candidate will probably never be publicly known, although hypnotized killers are alleged to have been used in the murders of Robert F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, John Lennon, and Israeli Premier Yitzhak Rabin, whilst Jonestown, which we will get to, is frequently cited as an MKUltra brainwashing factory. All of those people deserve a conspiracy 101 just to themselves, don't they? Sometime in 1972, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the destruction of the bulk of the MKUltra files because of a burgeoning paper problem. Sure. And that only fueled the fires of the conspiracy. One stone, however, was left unturned. Among those paid for compensation for the US government was the family of Dr. Frank Olson, who committed suicide in 1953 by jumping from the 10th floor of the New York Hotel Statler after taking LSD at the behest of Gottlieb. Olson's son Eric was not easily bought off and decided to investigate his father's death. It turns out he was murdered. It wasn't suicide. And we do not know. The CIA experimented on... So every single section in this book gives it like an alert level, where, like basically how true is it? The CIA experimented on human subjects to develop methods of mind control, alert level 10. That basically means yes. It was legit. And it is. You go through the research and you can read the many files that were released by the American government. The ones that weren't burnt. It's going to blow my... So, let's get into it. Let me just freeze frame that. I'm just going to copy over what I've already got up. I'm still finding my way with this series and whether or not I, totally, completely research it beforehand or just do it off the cuff and find things as we're going. And I want to find a happy medium between the two, where there is stuff that I've already got organised that I already know about, what you're seeing in the background, but also things that are new and exciting to me, because that's one of the things I want to tell people about in these videos in Conspiracy 101 is the ability to do research online and find lots of interesting information that leads you down rabbit holes that you didn't really realise were there, without it being too scripted, if that makes sense. So, let's have a look at MKUltra. Let's zoom in. Not to be confused with Edward Arsenal human experiments, which are really interesting, so we will look at that as well. And we will also look at the other, Artichoke was named in that one, but there's another one called Blue something. Bluebird, there it is. Which we will look at as well. Project MKUltra, or MKUltra, was the code name of an illegal human experimentation program designed and undertaken by the US Central Intelligence Agency. The CIA will come up a lot in these programs. And maybe a Conspiracy 101 episode could just centre around CIA and all the different things that they've done. Be like a bullet point list of horrors. The experiments were intended to develop procedures and identify drugs such as LSD that could be used in interrogations to weaken individuals and force confessions through brainwashing and psychological torture. MKUltra used numerous methods to manipulate its subjects' mental states and brain functions, such as covert administration of high doses of psychoactive drugs, especially LSD, and other chemicals, electroshocks, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse, in addition to other forms of torture. MKUltra was preceded by two drug-related experiments, Bluebird and Artichoke. It began in 1953 and was reduced in scope in 1964 and 1967 and was halted entirely in 1973. It was organised through the CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence and coordinated with the United States Army Biological Warfare Laboratories. Someone had to make the LSD, didn't they? The program engaged in legal activities, including the use of US and Canadian citizens as unwitting test subjects, like outside the borders of the US, which is very CIA. MKUltra's scope was broad, and activities carried out under the guise of research at more than 80 institutions, including college and universities, hospitals, prisons, and pharmaceutical companies. The CIA operated using front organisations, although some top officials at these institutions were aware of the CIA's involvement. So what they would do is they would give funding for specific projects to universities and specialist institutions, like prisons and mental wards and that kind of thing, and say, we're looking at all this, blah, 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 and try and have a cover for it so that it were the real reasons behind looking at the psychological warfare and whether or not that can be used for soldiers or prisoners of war was hidden. MKUltra was first brought to public attention in 1975 by the Church Committee of the United States Congress and Gerald Ford's U.S. Presidential Commission on CIA Activities within the United States, also known as the Rockefeller Commission. I wonder why they shortened it. Investigative efforts were hampered by CIA Director Richard Helms' order that all MKUltra files be destroyed in 1973. The Church Committee and Rockefeller Commission investigations relied on the sworn testimony of direct participants and on the small number of documents that survived Helms' order. In 1977, a Freedom of Information Act request uncovered a cache of 20,000 documents relating to MKUltra, which led to Senate hearings. Some surviving information about MKUltra was also declassified in July 2001. The American, they basically have, they have Freedom of Information Act, which is basically you can request information. It might not be publicly available, but you can request that information if you're an American citizen from the government about different things. And then they also have sort of like things become declassified after a certain amount of time, as long as they're not seen as super important in terms of security. And it's really interesting how much stuff is scrubbed, because even though they're declassifying things, names, institutions, dates might be blacked out and erased. Okay, so before we go into the background of it, which we will do, I want to read through a couple of documents that I've got up that actually are the memos, are the drafts of the people trying to put it into work. So this is 1953, which I think is before this one. Yeah, 1960. Okay, so let's try and read these. These are horrible, horrible. So it's draft, scrubbed, Boston something. That could have been after the fact. So it's 9th of June, 1953. Memorandum for the record. Subject, Project MKUltra, Sub-Project 8. So they had lots of these sub-projects that were the specific experiments and in specific areas. So MKUltra was huge, but it was some of these really small specific ones that were bad. Not all of them necessarily were bad, and maybe some of the scientists and universities involved were fine. Were doing things above board, and although the information was being gathered by the government and the military through the CIA, it wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It was just these specific ones which were awful. 1. Sub-Project 8 is being set up as a means to continue the present work in the general field of LSD at, scrubbed, until 11th of September 1954. 2. This project will include a continuation of a study of the biochemical, neurophysiological, sociological, and clinical psychiatric aspects of LSD, and also a study of LSD antagonists and drugs related to LSD, such as LAE. Never heard of that one. A detailed proposal is attached. The principal investigators will continue to be, scrubbed, all of, scrubbed. The estimated budget, 3. The estimated budget of the project at, scrubbed, is $39,500. The blank will serve as a cutout and cover for this project and will furnish the above funds to the blank as a philanthropic grant for medical research. A service charge of $790, 2% of the estimated budget, is to be paid to blank for this service. Thus, the total charges for this project will not exceed $40,290 for a period ending September 11th, 1954. 5. Blank, director of the hospital, are cleared through top secret and are aware of the true purpose of the project. So some of the people at the higher levels within the organisations that were doing the research were, it says, as a signature, Chemical Division TSSS, approved Chief Chemical Division TSSS, lots of information, blanked out, scrubbed. A, C, B, 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 randomised, very, very odd. The next one is 17th of August 1960 and is a little bit more detailed. Yes, a little bit there. Memorandum for the record. Subject: MKUltra Subproject 119. 1. The purpose of this subproject is to provide funds for a study conducted by blank. Is that what that is? Aha. So the things that have been blanked out, scrubbed out, are then given letters, which maybe is a way to identify them afterwards, or for the people who are actually marking them away. The purpose of the subproject is to provide funds for a study conducted by C to make a critical review of the literature and scientific developments related to the recording, analysis, and interpretation of bioelectrical signals from the human organism, and activation of human behaviour by remote means. When initiated, this study was being done on a consultant basis by... I can't read that. But it is blank, there's stuff written above it. The reason for converting this into a sub-project is to provide more flexibility in the dispersal, is it burr or per? Dispersal of funds. I guess dispersal of funds rather than dispersal of, elements, air. For various kinds of assistance and equipment needed. 2. As indicated in the attached proposal, this study is to provide an annotated bibliography and interpretive survey of work being done in psychophysiological research and instrumentation. The survey encompasses 5 main areas. A. Bioelectric sensors, sources of significant electrical potential and methods of pickup. B. Recording, amplification, electronic tape, and other multi-channel recording. C. Analysis, autocorrelators, spectrum analyzers, etc., and coordinated with automatic data processing equipment. D. Standardization for data for correlation with biochemical, physiological, and behavioral indices. And E. Techniques of activation of the human organism by remote electronic means. That's the big one, E. The being able to do things remotely and also affecting people through different means. 3. In lieu of higher overhead rates, title to permanent equipment purchased by funds granted VB shall remain with it VB. 4. The cost of the project will be $6,370, including $2,500 already allocated to C as a consulting fee. For 1 year beginning 1st July 1960, this project will be handled as a grant in aid from VB, and the handling of the funds disbursed will follow the standard practice set up for that organisation. Charges should be made against allotment numbers. 5. Whatever his name, Sol Sells, it says, I think, Sol or Paul, and others at Texas Christian University who may become associated with the project will be completely unwitting of sponsor. Interesting. And then it was approved by A in 1960. The project: to make critical review of literature and scientific developments related to recording, analysis, and interpretation of bioelectrical signals from human organism and activation of human behaviour by remote means. Activation of human behaviour by remote means. As it is visualised, the task should begin with the general survey of research and instrumentation in a number of fields, including neurophysiology, biophysics, anatomy, physiological, psychology, and neuropsychiatry, neuropsychiatry, as well as electronics, telemetry, and communications engineering. At the same time that bibliographic and related activities is initiated, correspondence should be undertaken with all laboratories, companies, and agencies working in or carrying out activities related to designated areas of the broad survey problem. Visits to laboratories may be undertaken if needed. The divisions of the problem fall naturally into 5 main areas. 1. Bioelectric sensors, source of significant electrical potential and methods of pickup. 2. Recording. We've just read through all these, haven't we? Progress has been made in the list of laboratories, investigators, and resources in the bioelectronic study is in preparation. Okay, so let's go back to MKUltra as a broad topic and read about them. But that's really interesting. Some of the release documents, their memos basically stating that, you know, we're going to give you money to do these experiments, and some of you will know about it, some of you won't. And if you do know about it, then some of them might want to do it, which is kind of crazy. Okay. Origin of the cryptonym. The project's CIA cryptonym is a combination of the diagraph MK, indicating the sponsorship of technical services staff, and the word Ultra, which formerly designated the most secret classification of World War II intelligence. The other cryptonyms included Project MK Naomi and MK Delta, was established to oversee the use of MKUltra materials abroad. According to the Church Committee, such materials were used on a number of occasions. So they did do stuff abroad, Canada obviously being one of the main ones. Origin of the project. According to author Stefan Kinsner, the CIA project was a continuation of work begun in the Second World War era Japanese facilities, which at some point I'm sure we will talk about, but I don't really want to talk about them on this episode because they're pretty dark. And Nazi concentration camps on subduing and controlling human minds. Kinzer wrote that MKUltra's use of mescaline on unwitting subjects was a practice that Nazi doctors had begun in the Dachau concentration camp. Kinzer proposes the evidence of a continuation of a Nazi agenda, citing the CIA's secret recruitment of Nazi torturers and vivisectionists. Vivisection, if you don't know, is experimentation on something that's still alive. So opening people up who are still alive. To continue the experimentation on thousands of subjects. And Nazis brought to Fort Detrick, Maryland, to instruct CIA officers of lethal uses of sarin gas. Sidney Gottlieb, which I know I'm pronouncing wrong, which is really frustrating because I'm really I really like pinball, and Gottlieb is one of a name associated with pinball, and I don't know how to pronounce it. Approved of an MKUltra sub-project on LSD in this June 9th, 1953 letter. So Sidney Gottlieb died in 1999. So he was a chemist and spy master, and who headed CIA's 1950s and 60s assassination attempts and mind control problem. Does that just go to... No, just go to CIA. Wow. Died at the ripe old age of 80. Good for him. Does it say how to pronounce his name? No, it doesn't. Okay, let's go back. No, I don't want to do that yet. Right. Aims and leadership. There we go. The project was headed by Sidney Gottlieb, but began on the order of CIA Director Alan Dulles on April 13, 1953. Its aim was to develop mind-controlling drugs for use against the Soviet bloc in response to the alleged Soviet, Chinese, and North Korean use of mind control techniques on US prisoners of war during the Korean War. We've talked about that. So, most of MKUltra's records were destroyed by order of the CIA Director Richard Helms, so it has been difficult for investigators to gain complete understanding of more than 150 funded research sub-projects sponsored by MKUltra and related CIA programs. I'm just going to see what that source is. Wow, that is a boring source and a half. Oh, okay, so this is the Department of Energy Openness Human Radiation Experiments. So this is really interesting. Okay, so we're using the Wayback Machine because this site isn't available anymore, or at least it's having trouble loading. As we have seen, the development of federal legislation for government-sponsored research with human subjects arose in part because of an institutional and governmental concern and public reaction to perceived abuses and failures by the government. Around the same time that the 1974 National Research Act was enacted, a scandal arose around the discovery of secret Cold War chemical experiments conducted by the CIA and DoD, Department of Defense. The review of these experiments led to the rediscovery of previously secret 1953 Wilson Memorandum, and later to the first Supreme Court decision in which the comment was made in dissent on the application of the Nuremberg Code to the conduct of the US government. Wow. In December 1974, the New York Times reported that CIA had conducted illegal domestic activities, including experiments on US citizens during the 1960s. The report prompted investigations by both Congress in the form of a Church Committee and by Presidential Commission, known as the Rockefeller Commission, into domestic activities of the CIA, FBI, and intelligence-related agencies in the military. Yep, that's basically what we were. Frank Olson was the guy who committed suicide, so we've already discussed that. So let's go back. Where was I? Whoa, look at all this stuff. Right. Aims and leadership, we're done. Scale of the project. One 1955 MKUltra document gives an indication of the size and range of the effort. It refers to the study of an assortment of mind-altering substances described as follows. Substances which will promote illogical thinking and impulsiveness to a point where recipient would be discredited in public. So that's a really interesting one. Is, if you can slip someone drugs and make them out like a fool, and then suddenly they are the town fool. Two substances which increase the efficiency of mentation and perception. Mentation is mental activity, apparently. 3. Materials which will prevent or counteract the intoxicating effect of alcohol. Materials which promote the intoxicating effect of alcohol. Materials which produce signs and symptoms, recognize diseases in a reversible way so they can use malingering. Materials which will render the induction of hypnosis easier or otherwise enhance its usefulness. Substances which will enhance the ability of individuals to withstand privation, torture and coercion during interrogation and so-called brainwashing. Materials and physical methods which will produce amnesia for the events preceding and during their use. That's a really interesting one because that comes up a lot during other conspiracies. 9. Physical methods of producing shock and confusion over extended periods of time and capable of surreptitious use. 10. Substances which produce physical disablement, such as paralysis of the legs or acute anemia. 11. Substances which will produce pure euphoria with no subsequent letdown. Right, I think we need to look into number 11 a little bit more. 12. Substances which alter personality structure in a way that tendency of the recipient to become dependent upon another person is enhanced. 13. A material which will cause mental confusion of such a type that the individual under its influence will find it difficult to maintain a fabrication under questioning. So they won't be able to lie, basically. Substances which will lower the ambition and general working efficiency of men when administered in undetectable amounts. So that's a really interesting one. You could really disrupt a lot of the world's economy, couldn't you, with something like that? 15. Substances which promote weakness or distortion in the eyesight or hearing faculties, preferably without permanent effects. 16. A knockout pill which can be surreptitiously administered in drinks, food, cigarettes, as an aerosol, etc., which will be safe to use, provide a maximum of amnesia, and will be suitable for the use of agent types on an ad hoc basis. 17. A material which can be surreptitiously administered by the above routes and which in very small amounts will make it impossible for a person to perform physical activity. Now, all of these on the surface are things that a military, a government might want to get and it's not necessarily a bad thing. All of these, if done in a well thought out and constructed way, very scientifically, are not necessarily bad things. Understanding the chemicals, especially these chemicals. LSD was... When was LSD, like, invented? Or discovered, I should probably say. Discovered its effects in humans in 1943. These were really new drugs, basically. These were new... This was a new era. And to try and figure out these is not necessarily a bad thing. The way they tried to do it, that's what makes it bad. And then them trying to hide it or discredit the people who are coming out and talking about it is what made it a conspiracy. Okay, so the Church Committee report found that MK Delta program, drugs were used primarily as an aid to interrogations, but MKUltra materials were also used for harassment, discrediting, or disabling purposes. So it wasn't just for interrogation. Other related projects, we're not going to get into those because we'll just go down a thing, but MK often was to deal with testing toxicology, transmissivity, and behavioural effects of drugs in animals and ultimately humans, and MK Chickwit, great name, was concerned with acquiring information on new drug developments in Europe and Asia, so basically spying on people. Okay, so experiments on Americans. CIA documents suggest that they investigated chemical and biological and radiological methods of mind control as part of MKUltra. They spent an estimated $10 million or more, roughly $87.5 million adjusted for inflation. In terms of budgets, especially in terms of American budgets, that's not a lot. LSD. Earlier CIA efforts focused on LSD-25, which later came to dominate many of MKUltra's programs. The CIA wanted to know if they could make Soviet spies defect against their will, whether the Soviets could do the same to the CIA's own operatives. Again, starting out with relatively simple and clear intentions. Documents obtained by the CIA by John D. Marks under Freedom of Information in 1976 showed that in 1953 the CIA considered purchasing 10 kilograms of LSD, enough for 100 million doses. Okay, so they didn't make it, they just bought it. The proposed purchase aimed to stop other countries from controlling the supply. The documents showed that CIA purchased some quantities of LSD from Sandoz laboratories in Sweden. Interesting. One project MKUltra got underway in April 1953. Once Project MKUltra got underway. Experiments included administering LSD to mental patients, prisoners, drug addicts, and prostitutes, people who could not fight back, as one agency officer put it. In one case, they administered LSD to a mental patient in Kentucky for 175 days. So these people are already dealing with problems. If you're a mental patient, definitely. Prisoners more than likely have mental issues. Drug addicts and prostitutes are in a place mentally probably not sound. Giving them LSD just to see the effects, scary. They also administered LSD to CIA employees, military personnel, doctors, and other government agents and members of the general public to study their reactions. LSD and other drugs were often administered without the subject's knowledge or informed consent. So informed consent is basically, do they understand the what's going to happen and why things are going to happen? You say, here, do you want this? And then someone taking it, that's not informed consent. A violation of the Nuremberg Code, the US had agreed to follow after World War II. Let's just quickly go on the Nuremberg Code. So it's the ethical research principles for human experimentation created by the court in US versus Brandt, one of the subsequent Nuremberg trials that were held after the Second World War. So basically, after the Second World War, the countries agreed that experimentation on humans in that way, in the ways that happened during the Second World War, especially in Japan and Germany, were not okay. And then the US government just went, meh, it's not us. The aim of this was to find drugs which would bring out deep confessions or wipe a subject's mind clean and program them as a robot agent. In Operation Midnight Climax, the CIA set up several brothels. They set up the brothels themselves, crazy, with agency safe houses in San Francisco to obtain a selection of men who would be too embarrassed to talk about the event. The men were dosed with LSD, the brothels were equipped with one-way mirrors, and the sessions were filmed for later viewing and study. In other experiments, where the people were given to LSD without their knowledge, they were interrogated under bright lights and doctors in the background taking notes. Heroin addicts were bribed into taking LSD with offers of more heroin. You can see how this Operation Midnight Climax, they were doing the one-way mirrors, sessions were filmed for later viewing and study. You can see how that could devolve into blackmail and that kind of, those kind of areas. At invitation of Stanford psychology graduate student Vic Lovell, an acquaintance of Richard Alpert and Allen Ginsberg, Ken Kieser volunteered to take part in what turned out to be a CIA-financed study under the aegis. What does that word mean? That's a cool word. Aegis. It's an animal skin or a shield. I guess it does mean defense. Protection, backing, or support of. Okay, that makes more sense. Of MKUltra at the Menlo Park Veterans Hospital, where he worked as a night aide. The project studied the effects of psychoactive drugs, particularly LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, cocaine, AMT, and DMT on people. It's weird, isn't it? Because nowadays, especially nowadays, because that kind of research, even in a scientific and well-regarded institutions, has been pretty much banned. But there would be so many people who would want to be part of experiments like that, given free LSD and mescaline and DMT just to see how they behaved. But obviously that wasn't a consideration of the CIA. And that led to a big gap of research into these drugs, because the war on drugs kind of stopped research and institutions being able to use them and experiment on them in a safe way to see their effect on humanity. And yeah, all that time that we would have been able to research. I think now we're slowly getting back into it. But yeah, very interesting. Okay. So Sidney Gottlieb thought it could be used for covert operations. Since the effects were temporary, believed it could be given to high-ranking officials, and in this way affect the course of important meetings and speeches. So that's scary. Okay. We're going to look at Frank Olson separately. Other drugs, given barbiturates, intravenous ones, amphetamine. Jesus. Other experiments involved heroin, morphine, temazepam, under the code name MK Search, mescaline, psilocybin, scolopamine, alcohol, and sodium penthanol. Hypnosis. Declassified MKUltra documents indicate that they studied hypnosis in the early 1950s. Experiments' goals included creating hypnotically induced anxieties, hypnotically increased ability to learn and recall complex written matter, study in hypnosis and polygraph examinations, hypnotically increasing ability to observe and recall complex arrangements of physical objects, and study in relationship of personality to susceptibility to hypnosis. They conducted experiments with drug-induced hypnosis and with anterograde and retrograde amnesia while under the influence of such drugs. Again, they're fine. Studying hypnosis is fine. It's just the way they're going about it is horrendous. So that was the experiments on the Americans, and somehow they experimented on other nations. Experiments on Canadians. The CIA exported experiments to Canada, where they recruited British... Of course there's a Brit involved. British psychiatrist Donald Ewan Cameron, who is pictured above me. Creator of the psychic driving concept, which CIA found interesting. Well, we're going to be looking at that, aren't we? Psychic driving was a psychiatric procedure in the 1950s in which patients were subjected to continuously repeated audio messages on loop tape to alter their behaviour. Okay, so that's... yeah. Not Olsen yet, no. In addition to LSD, Cameron also experimented with various paralytic drugs as well as electroconvulsive therapy at 30 to 40 times the normal power. Ugh. His treatments resulted in victims' urinary incontinence, amnesia, forgetting how to talk, forgetting their parents, and thinking their interrogators were their parents. Wow. Oh my god. During this era, Cameron became known worldwide as the first chairman of the World Psychiatric Association, as well as president of both the American Psychiatric Association and the Canadian equivalent. Cameron was also a member of the Nuremberg Medical Tribunal in 1946 to 1947. Secret detention camps. In areas under American control in the early 1950s in Europe and East Asia, mostly Japan, Germany and the Philippines, the CIA created secret detention centers so that the US could avoid criminal prosecution. Still being done today, isn't it? So the CIA captured people suspected of being enemy agents and other people it deemed expendable to undertake various types of torture and human experimentation on them. The prisoners were interrogated whilst being administered psychoactive drugs, electroshocked, and subject to extremes of temperature, sensory isolation, and the like to develop a better understanding of how to destroy and control human minds. Oh, there's Frank Church, the namesake of the Church Committee. In 1973, amid the government-wide panic caused by Watergate, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered all MKUltra files destroyed. Pursuant to this order, most CIA documents regarding the project were destroyed, making a full investigation of MKUltra impossible. A cache of some 20,000 documents survived Helms' purge. That's a lot. Think how many must have been destroyed if 20,000 survived, as they had been incorrectly stored in a financial records building and were discovered following the FOIA request in 1977. These documents were fully investigated during the Senate hearings in 1977. Incredible. Deaths. Given the CIA's purposeful destruction of most records, its failure to follow informed consent protocols with thousands of participants, the uncontrolled nature of the experiments, and the lack of follow-up data, the full impact of MKUltra experiments, including deaths, may never be known. Several known deaths have been associated with Project MKUltra, most notably that of Frank Olsen. So let's talk about him. Frank Rudolph Emanuel Olsen, who died in 1953, was born in 1910, was an American bacteriologist and biological warfare scientist and employed by the United States Army Biological Warfare Laboratories and worked at Camp Detrick. Oh, just give me a second, I need to blow my nose again. My worst enemy is grass. Okay. At a meeting in rural Maryland, he was covertly dosed with LSD by his colleague Sidney Gottlieb, head of the CIA's MKUltra program, and 9 days later plunged to his death from the window of Hotel Statler in New York. The US government first described his death as suicide and then as misadventure, while others alleged murder. The Rockefeller Commission report in the CIA in 1975 acknowledged their having conducted covert drug studies on fellow agents. Olsen's death is one of the most mysterious outcomes of the CIA mind control project, MKUltra. A semi-monthly retreat of the men closest to MKUltra was scheduled at a cabin at Deep Creek Lake of Wednesday, November 18th to Friday, November 20th, 1953. A tentative participants list was included 12 names. Okay, so Olsen, a scientist, yep, who was suspected of being a security risk. Olsen's supervisor. And a bunch of other personnel. John C. Malinsky, a Detrick staffer who didn't drink alcohol and thus was not dosed. CIA participants, Gottlieb, CIA chemist responsible for MKUltra, Gottlieb's deputy, who dosed the liquor everyone was drinking along with Gottlieb, who's suspected to be CIA, Henry Bortner of the CIA. On the Thursday evening around 7:30, Olson and some of the other participants were drugged with a potential truth serum, decades later discovered to be LSD. The next morning, Olson headed back to Maryland and a changed man. Having dinner with his family, Olson refused to eat and seemed distant from his family, not speaking about his trip or attending to his children. He blurted out to his wife, "I've made a terrible mistake." MKUltra had been underway for 7 months at this time, and barely 24 men knew the true nature and intentions of the project. On November 23rd, Olson and his boss, Lieutenant Colonel Vincent Ruett, who was there, arrived at work at Detrick, both still in bad shape from a retreat. Ruett later recalled that Olson appeared to be agitated and asked if Ruett should fire him or if he should quit. While Ruett was able to calm him down for the day, Olson only worsened by the next day. Ruett later testified Olson was disorientated, felt all mixed up about the work he had been doing, and felt all mixed up and incompetent in his field. He attempted to resign, and then around 2 a.m. on the morning of Saturday, November 28, 1953, Olson plummeted into the sidewalk in front of the Hotel Pennsylvania. At the time, it was called the Statler Hilton Hotel. Wow. The night manager rushed to Olson, who was still alive and who tried to mumble something. Olson died before medical help arrived. Years later, the night manager recalled, "In all my years in the hotel business, I never encountered a case where someone got up in the middle of the night, ran across a dark room in his underwear, avoiding 2 beds, and dove through a closed window with the shade and curtains drawn." When police entered the hotel room, they found Robert Lashbrook sitting on the toilet in the room he shared with Olson. While a hotel switchboard operator reported having connected a call from room 1018A to a number listed as belonging to Dr. Harold Abramson. According to the operator, who overheard the entirety of the brief call, the occupant of 1018A reported, "Well, he's gone," to which the call's recipient had replied, "Well, that's too bad." Lashbrook's wallet containing his initials, address, and phone number of magician-turned-CIA John Mulholland. Lashbrook claimed he and Olson had visited Mulholland, although this is disputed by author H.P. Abrali. At the scene, and in their written report, the 2 police officers discussed similarities to the 1948 Lawrence Duggan case, in which a high-level government official suspected of espionage died after plummeting from his New York office. The ensuing police report said that on his last night in Manhattan, Olson purposely threw himself out of the window of his 10th floor hotel room at the Hotel Statler, which he had been sharing with Lashbrook, and died shortly after impact. Oh, wow. After the family announced they planned to sue the agency over Olson's wrongful death, the government offered them an out-of-court settlement of $1.25 million, later reduced to $750,000, about $3.8 million in 2021 value, which they accepted. The family received apologies from President Gerald Ford and CIA Director William Colby. In 1994, Eric Olson had his father's body exhumed to be buried with his mother. The family decided to have a second autopsy performed. The 1953 medical report completed immediately after Dr. Olson's death indicated there are cuts and abrasions on the body. The theory sparked about Olson having been assassinated by the CIA led to the second autopsy, which was performed by James Starrs, Professor of Law and Forensic Science at the George Washington University National Law Center. His team searched the body for any cuts and abrasions and found none, though did find a large hematoma on the left side of Olson's head and a large injury on his chest. Most of the team concluded that a blunt force trauma to the head and the injury to the chest had not occurred during the fall, but most likely before the fall. One team member dissented. Starrs called the evidence rankly and starkly suggestive of homicide. Wouldn't he have hit his head if he had gone through a closed window, though? So maybe that was for a head, but the chest. Interesting. Right, let's go back to MKUltra. So we read about Frank Olson. Okay. So in a 2010 book by H.P. Albari Jr., who we did hear about briefly before, alleged that the 1951 Pont Saint-Esprit mass poisoning was part of MK Delta. Olson was involved in that event, and that was eventually murdered by the CIA, so that's why he was murdered. However, academic sources attribute the incident to ergo poisoning through a local bakery. It was a mass poisoning on the 15th of August 1951, in which a small town of Pont Saint-Esprit in southern France, more than 250 people were involved, including 50 people interned in asylums and 7 deaths. A foodborne illness was suspected, and among these, it was originally believed to be a case of cursed bread. The majority of academic sources accept naturally occurring ergo poisoning as the cause of the epidemic, while a few theorise it was poisoning by mercury, mycotoxins, and nitrogen trichloride. Very interesting. So it does seem to be the MKUltra link does seem to be a bit, I don't know, tenuous. Legal issue involving informed consent, that's a bit boring, so let's just go back. Notable people, documented subjects. American poet Allen Ginsberg first took LSD as an experiment on Stanford University's campus where he could listen to records of his choice. He said the experience was resulted in a slight paranoia that hung on all my acid experiences through the mid-60s, and I learned from meditation how to disperse that. He became an outspoken advocate of psychedelics in the 1960s, and after hearing suspicions that the experiment was CIA-funded, wrote, "Am I, Allen Ginsberg, the product of one of the CIA's lamentable, ill-advised, or triumphantly successful experiments of mind control?" Ken Kesey, author of One Flew Over Cuckoo's Nest, is said to have volunteered for MKUltra experiments involving LSD. Robert Hunter, an American lyricist, best known for his association with the Grateful Dead. Again, Stanford University test subject. Alleged subjects: Boston mobster James Whitley Bulger alleged that he had been subjected to weekly injections of LSD and subsequently testing while in prison in Atlanta. Ted Kaczynski, an American domestic terrorist known as the Unabomber, was said to be a subject of voluntary psychological study alleged by some sources to have been part of MKUltra. As a sophomore at Harvard, Kaczynski participated in studies described by author Alston Chase as a purposely brutalizing psychological experiment led by Harvard psychologist Henry Murray. In total, Kaczynski spent 200 hours as part of the study. Lawrence Teeter was the attorney for Sirhan Sirhan, who was convicted of murdering Robert F. Kennedy. He believed that Sirhan was operating under MKUltra mind control techniques. Again, that's going to be its own episode, I think. Maybe do like a conspiracy assassinations episode. So, MKUltra plays a part in many conspiracy theories due to its nature and destruction of most of the records. And that's the end of the Wikipedia article. So, why is this so interesting? I think the main reason is it seems to be a conspiracy that was purposely tried to, they tried to scrub it. They tried to get rid of the record so that nobody could find out about what happened. We will look at Bluebird and Project Artichoke briefly, but before we go into the many different reasons why I think this is a really interesting conspiracy to talk about, a word from our sponsor. Our sponsors have been a bit hit and miss recently, but I have the read in front of me, the sponsor read in front of me. So today's sponsor is Fast Signs. More than fast, more than signs. That doesn't make any sense. Fast Signs. Thank you for sponsoring us. Right. Let's have a little brief cleanse before we go into the final thoughts on MKUltra. Why did I click Project Artichoke twice? Does it just... Oh, it just goes straight to that. Okay. Right, let's have a look at the Edgewood Arsenal human experiments. So from 1948 to 1975, US Army Chemical Corps conducted classified human subject research Edgewood Arsenal facility in Maryland. The purpose was to evaluate the impact of low-dose chemical warfare agents on military personnel. So they did this. This is more of a like a proper experiment. They took the soldiers and they, gave them drugs and tested various nerve toxins and, on volunteers. That's the main difference, isn't it? So, so let's sit back and relax and watch this bad boy. I don't know if it's actually got any sound, but we'll see.
A typical drill sergeant ordered his men to fall in. The squad, composed of volunteers for the test, responded like well-trained soldiers, immediately and without question. On the drill field, the men obeyed his commands accurately and with precision. A second drill sergeant assumed command. He put the squad through its paces capably. This man also proved to be an able drill sergeant, giving precise commands. Hours later, the squad, all except the drill sergeant, now drugged with LSD, again was ordered to fall in. The response was not the same. The squad leader thought it was not necessary for him to dress right. There was much laughter as the group attempted to give expression to inner emotions. This elation was group-supported, and an individual who was separated from the group would show severe disturbance. Notice the volunteer who salutes several times. 5 minutes later, his severe depression caused the medical officers to end his participation in the test. Response and actions of the drill sergeant who did not receive LSD were as before. But in marching, the drugged squad, although starting fairly well, gave a sluggish and ragged performance. After a few minutes, the men found it difficult to obey orders, and soon the results were chaotic. The second drill sergeant, who had performed effectively earlier in the day, was now given command of the squad. He too had received LSD, and he no longer was an effective leader. officer ordered the leader to drill the squad, he responded with, "You want them drilled? You drill them." Ordered to leave the field, he refused to go. In answer to a direct question, he said he was capable of drilling the men and was instructed to do so. Minutes later, it was evident that he was unable to carry out his orders, and he was escorted from the field. We have seen some of the effects of LSD. What effect would it have on a vital operation? Further research is required to give us that answer.
Yeah, we need to do more research. Let's do more research. Let's do more research together, yeah? That is how you... I don't know, it's very hard to tell, isn't it, from a clip that was obviously released relatively early on in the experimentation. But that seems more akin to what you should be doing, how you would go about testing the effectiveness of certain drugs. Let's have a quick look at Project Artichoke and then we'll wrap it up. So, Operation Artichoke was the CIA research interrogation methods. Okay. So, preceded by Bluebird, Artichoke officially rose in 1951. So, Artichoke led on to MKUltra, which is what we talked about. It was designed to determine whether a person could be involuntarily made to perform an act of attempted assassination. The project also studied hypnosis, forced morphine addiction, and subsequent forced withdrawal, and also other chemicals, including LSD, to reduce amnesia and other vulnerable states in subjects. So that's a prelude to MKUltra, which obviously took things a little bit further. As you've probably noticed, I haven't added anything to our Canva, and I think it's probably just because it's been quite a deep, quite a dark subject. And one of the reasons why I really wanted to talk about this, or one of the others that was a conspiracy theory, or is a conspiracy theory that is seen to be true, is because I can totally understand the other conspiracy theorists who look at these kind of things and say, well, if this is possible, then imagine what else is possible. We don't know the full extent of MKUltra. It could have been much, much worse than what has been released, but what has been found out. What was found out is pretty awful in and of itself. The fact that this was done in a Western country by a government that is often seen as trying to be the pinnacle of democracy, to itself, but also to other nations. Imagine what could be going on right now, or what could have been done in the past in regards to other conspiracies. And that is one of the main points I wanted to get through in this episode early on in Conspiracy 101. In that, although some of the things we're going to be looking at it's a bit silly, with giants, a bit ridiculous with things like aliens, some of the conspiracies that surround them are not necessarily as laughable as you might think. The idea that a government would purposely give people of its country LSD to test the effectiveness in regards to spying and warfare is hard to believe. And I think I will be referring to MKUltra as we go through Conspiracy 101, because I think there's going to be a few times where we look at something and go, that's a bit dumb, but you never know. MKUltra happened. I think we've reached the limit of what can be learnt today. But before we finish, conspiracies are definitely heavy sometimes, and this was definitely this is the heaviest episode we've done so far. And I want to end with something a little bit light. Like, I haven't done any of what we usually do in regards to the prompts on the screen and Canva and stuff. And I think there are certain episodes where I won't. This one especially, because unlike other conspiracy theories where you can quite easily and naturally go, yeah, but that's not true. This happened. So it's very, take it a little bit seriously. But I always like to end on something a bit more fun. Even when we're doing fun stuff, I still like to end on something a bit more fun. So this is something you've probably heard of, or you might not have. It's called the Witney. I have no idea how to say that. Manuscript is an illustrated codex, and this is really interesting. Handwritten in an otherwise unknown writing system referred to as Witney. It's vellum, which I'm pretty sure is just deer, isn't it? Or any animal skin or membrane used for writing. So yeah, it could be deer. And which it is written has been carbon dated to the early 15th century. So it's authentic, but it's just a mystery. Stylistic analysis indicates that it may have been composed in Italy during the Italian Renaissance. The origins and authorship and purpose of the manuscript are debated. No one really knows. Various hypotheses have been suggested, including that it is otherwise unrecorded script for a natural language or a constructed language, an unread code, a cipher, some other form of cryptography, or simply a meaningless hoax. Someone was pissing about. The manuscript currently consists of around 240 pages, but there's evidence that the additional pages are missing. Some pages are foldable sheets of varying size. Most of the pages have fantastical illustrations or diagrams, some crudely coloured, with sections of the manuscript showing people, fictitious plants, astrological symbols, etc. The text is written from left to right, so very European text. The manuscript is named after Wilfred Woniek, a Polish book dealer who purchased it in 1912. Since 1969, it has been held in Yale University Manuscript Library. The Woniek manuscript has been studied by many professional and amateur cryptographers, including American and British codebreakers from both the Second World War and the First World War. The manuscript has never been demonstrably deciphered, and none of the main hypotheses proposed over the last 100 years have been independently verified. Basically, no two people can agree on what it is, why it is, or what it says. The mystery of its meaning and origin has excited popular imagination, making it a subject of study and speculation. Yale University published a manuscript online in its entirety, 225 pages in their digital collections library. Right, I'm not going to read through the entire Wikipedia because I think you should go do that. But let's have a quick look at the manuscript because it is really weird. Right, is that on? Yep, that's good. So you can see it's kind of. It seems to be some kind of. It looks like a not an encyclopedia, but it's called something where they used to draw plants and then describe them in detail so that other botanists could research them. Before you could take pictures, you'd have someone detailing it. But some of these plants don't exist or are weird. And then it also includes other things, not just plants. So let's find something good, and then I'll zoom in so you can see the script. And maybe I'll attempt at reading it. Can I just use my... No. Let's go right to the end and then go back on ourselves. Oh, this is just like... Oh, okay, that's cool. Actually, like, scans everything. Look at that in the back. See, is that the scrawlings of a madman, or is that... Look at this. This is amazing, isn't it? It looks like something Tolkien-esque. I wouldn't even know what those letters are, let alone try and pronounce it. It looks like there's so many different C's. Incredible. So there are lots of different theories about what this is, whether it is a natural language that is maybe very specific to a region, or a sort of like a coded language, like things like reporters when they use write in coded language. Da Vinci did that a lot. So it might be that. But why a cipher does seem a bit silly unless there is some kind of nefarious reason as to why. And that's where conspiracies around it come in. Not everything we do at the end of Conspiracy 101 is going to be another conspiracy, but there are definitely some conspiracies about this. But I love deciphering stuff. The fact that a language can be gone and no one know how to read it or understand it, and then people come together and work on it and decipher and decode it. And sometimes you get a Rosetta Stone, which helps, but sometimes you don't. And there's a couple of examples of that which I will probably talk about as an extra after one of these Conspiracy 101. Look at that, it's amazing. What is going on? I love it. Anyway, yes. Lots of different things like that are very interesting. So I'm going to leave that with you. Yeah, the von I don't know how to say it. How do you say it? No, how to say? How to say? How to pronounce? Say it.
Witney.
Okay, listen to this.
Witney.
Witney. That's not how I was going to say it. Anyway. Thank you very much for watching. This has been a really enjoyable episode. If you got it all the way through here, thank you very much. Join me on Twitch, Saturday evenings, every week usually. If not, you can always catch the videos online. Thank you very much for watching, and don't forget to breathe.